Hey, Aleida, welcome to 2 Decades Deep podcast.
Yay!
I'm so glad that you're here. And for those who are unfamiliar, Aleida is a soul prosperity coach. She is a woman of faith. She is a wife and a mother, and she has a story to tell, okay?
Yes.
We're going to be talking all about her book momentarily, but I just wanted to say thanks so much for trusting us with your story. And I'm really glad that we're going to be able to dive into the story in a meaningful way.
Great. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, the theme of this year or of this season is nostalgia. And nostalgia is essentially that sentimental longing for the past, but it ties into positive emotion. And so we ask every guest on the show, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you when I say nostalgia?
Ooh, I feel like my backyard, childhood, music, trampoline, sandbox. I don't know. I just think of my childhood. Yeah.
And you said your backyard. So where are you from? Are you from Chicago?
No, I am actually from the suburbs of Buffalo, New York. So Chicago, I consider home now. I've been here for like 16 years. Came here for college. So it's home. But yeah, New York.
I love me some New York. So I love that. I was like, that's why we're vibing right now. We're going to go into your past and kind of tell you how we wound up here today. But I do want to address what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah.
And we are going to be talking about abuse. And that can be a topic that's pretty triggering or hard for people to navigate. And so thank you for trusting this podcast to navigate this conversation. I do want to open up with some statistics on based on 2024 of just essentially like the peak of domestic violence or domestic abuse. According to the World Health Organization, individuals in their 20s experience some of the highest forms of abuse. And what that falls under is intimate partner violence, financial fraud, verbal, physical, emotional abuse, or stalking. And the rates with partner violence really do peak at 20. And the high risk groups are 18 to 24. And then 25 to 34. And while women are commonly most abused by intimate partners, we don't want to negate the fact that men also endure abuse as well. And according to the CDC, many men for the first time experience intimate partner violence and stalking before the age of 25. And so that's something I just wanted to name as we're going through this conversation. People identify abuse in different forms. They have different definitions for it. So I just wanted to ground the conversation. Like that's essentially the overarching definition is what I'm talking about abuse.
Yeah, and it's so timely. I don't know if you know, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So it's definitely beautiful.
It's definitely very timely. And thanks for your courage again.
Yeah.
But let's dive into the conversation. I think it's important before we go in to your past, just to know a little bit more about you and what you're currently doing today.
Yeah, so I coach. That's primarily what I brand myself as a soul prosperity coach. Outside of that, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a woman of God. And I just love people. I love supporting women in their growth and their development, and helping people become their best selves. So yeah, that's my world. Ministry is my heart as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would love to know kind of what inspired you to be a life coach.
Honestly, it is just my story. I wish it was a linear answer to that, but it's just my story and how things progress for me. I knew I was called to women early on. I would say in my early 20s. I knew I was called to women, but I didn't know what that would look like. And then I got married. We're talking about abuse and domestic violence. So I got married in my 20s, and I found myself in a relationship that was unhealthy and toxic. And then coming out of that, however, and piecing everything together, my story, trying to get understanding, trying to make sense of what happened. And once I got to the other side, I realized, okay, I have this story, I have this testimony, and now I'm able to help women who are where I was 10 years ago. So it's kind of, there's a lot of hills and turns and in that, but yeah, that's that's what happened.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about your previous relationship momentarily, but I think sometimes it's important. A lot of us, unfortunately, are going to end up in abusive relationships, whether it's physically or emotionally, etc. And a lot of people just assume like, oh, it's because of this or your childhood, this, that, and the third. But I want to start with how you grew up and how did you essentially view love growing up?
Yeah, so I didn't have a lot of healthy example of love growing up. So I am the byproduct of an affair. And so my father wasn't around and my mother had me in her 40. And so I was her youngest child and she had an experience with abusive relationships prior to. And then my father, who was not honest about being married in the beginning. And so I didn't see a lot of examples of healthy love. I mean, my only really influence was what I saw on television, right? Or heard in the music, in songs. And so I had a desire for it, but I didn't really know what healthy love really looked like growing up. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you say that there was abuse, there was infidelity in the relationship, was that something that you were privy to? Did you grow up seeing that, or was it just something that you found out a little bit later in life?
I would say I found out a little bit later. So my dad wasn't necessarily around because I was an outside child, and so I grew up in like a single parent home, but I heard the stories. I heard, and not necessarily taught these things, but you kind of pick things up subconsciously, just how like my mother and my family responded and treated relationships and love, or would talk about men. And so I just I picked those things up. It wasn't something that was like directly taught to me, but you just subconsciously pick these things up. So
absolutely. There have been so many things, whether it's the simplest thing of like, oh, make sure my car is cleaned, or if it's as simple as like, oh, when I get triggered, like I naturally isolate. Like there's things that you subconsciously pick up from your parents. Mm-hmm. And so I'd be interested to know, because I know in your book, The Second Bride, you kind of talk about like you didn't grow up as a Christian. You also didn't really grow up thinking that you really necessarily wanted to get married. So I'd love to know, how did your perception of love or your desire for marriage change? Like what did that look like?
Yeah. So as I shared, I'm not from Chicago. So I moved here. And at that time, I don't even think I went to I've never been to a wedding, like growing up. And so I got saved in college, right? So my roommate was a Christian, started going to church, learned about the Lord. And so I started to see a different perspective on relationships and marriage. And then when I read the word and saw how God intended for love to be, and how God intended for relationships to be, that desire started to open up for me. And I wanted to do things differently. I wanted to do things differently. And so I said, maybe this is something that I should consider. And I think, it's even in my book, like I didn't even really have a desire for children and that sort of thing, just because I was like, oh, I don't want to repeat this. But my heart started to change the more I got aligned with who I am in God.
Mm-hmm. Something that you said, to clarify, you said that you read the word and you figured out what love is intended to be. What are some of the things that stood out that really were your driving forces or changed your perspective on what love is supposed to be?
Yeah, I mean, it is the initial institution in Scripture was marriage. God created man and woman to be together. And so I was like, okay. And I thought about, the iconic love scripture, you know what I mean? Love is patient, love is kind, love is all these things. And again, it's just was different because I grew up around a lot of manipulation, a lot of betrayal, a lot of abuse, not necessarily just physically, like emotional neglect. And it just opened me up to new possibilities and not just like the fairy tales that you see on Disney or on TV. I'm like, oh, this is real. And then I started to meet other people who, had these stories where their parents have been married, 30 years. And I'm like, wow, like a lot of that was really foreign to me just because I didn't see it. Yeah.
And that ultimately changed, like, the fueled your desire to think about marriage. And you even said earlier, you said that you didn't want to repeat that. So was that really the reason why you would say that you ultimately didn't want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a lot of pain that I saw. Even with like, I grew up closer in age to my nieces and nephews because my siblings are much older than me. And so I just seen like even how the cycle was repeating, even with my nieces and nephews and some of the pain. And I just was like, yeah, no, I don't want that, you know? And I think I always kind of thought like, if I was to have kids, I would want to make sure it's with someone I know I'm going to be really locked in with, but I didn't necessarily say I had to be married. So yeah.
Yeah. And I just wanted to make sure we grounded your perspective before we go into your former relationship. So kind of as you sit here and reflect on who you were prior to getting into your first marriage, like what do you remember about that version of yourself?
Yeah, man, it's two different people. Two different people. I mean, on the outside, you know, look mostly the same, but you know, two different people. There was a lot of things that I did not process. So when I first met my ex-husband, I was maybe 26, I think. And I was still learning myself. I was still getting to know myself, still trying to understand my purpose and my identity. There's a lot of things I did not process yet as far as like my relationship with my father. And I was just growing, figuring out like career. I was figuring out a lot of things. And I think that was that's the biggest difference between who I am now and who I was then, and who I was when I met my now husband. Just completely different. I'm very secure in who I am. I know who I am. I know whose I am. And all of those things make a difference in the choices and decisions that I make when it comes relationally and just throughout life.
Yeah. And being in your 20s, I mean, in transitional phases, period, there's a lot of discovery. There's a lot of undoing, redefining yourself. And yeah, I definitely can relate. Being in your 20s there's just a lot of discovery there. And so can you set the scene up? Like, how did you meet your ex-husband?
Yeah. We actually met at church. So my ex-husband is a pastor. And so I was at a large church in Chicago praying. They have a prayer service annually every year. And he saw me. And from there, a mutual friend that he's connected through social, like recognized that I was friends with through social media, reached out to me. And that's how it started. And then I was just out of another dating relationship and I was like, you know what? I'm going to be single. I'm going to take some time to just with me. Cause I was always that girl who had somebody, right? Especially before Christ, like I was always in a relationship with somebody. And that was just kind of like a codependent thing that I had going on. And I was like very close to be like, you know what? When this person reached out to me, like, no, I don't need to date. But he said, oh, if it wasn't this guy, you know, he's a pastor. So it intrigued me because it was so different from what I knew throughout my life. And mind you, I was young in my faith and I'm like zealous and trying to do things different. And so, I agreed to give him my phone number and the conversation started. And from there, the relationship moved very, very quickly, which is a little bit of a red flag, but I didn't see it at the time.
What's quickly? Because everyone has their own perception of what's quick and what's long.
And now I have seen people do this successfully, but he proposed to me in 2 months and we got married in 3. And one little catch to that, no one could actually know about it because I was his second wife and it's a whole story, but the church he pastored at didn't believe in remarriage. And so we kept the relationship a secret for almost a year. Yeah. Okay.
So just to clarify, so you all met, dated for 2 months, he proposed, and then 3 months later, so within a span of 5 months, you all were married? Or
No. He proposed in 2 months, and then a month later we were married. Yeah.
Got it.
So we were married 3 months after meeting. And another note with that, I didn't know he just divorced his first wife a couple weeks after we met. So, yeah.
We're going to dive into that for a second, but you said that he was different than what you were used to. Besides him being a pastor, what were other things that stood out to you that ultimately drew you in?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was him being seemingly anchored in his faith, right? And being aligned with the person that I was becoming. And he really did kind of connect and speak to and understand when I would share certain things about my past. He seemed very empathetic to that and understanding, was also vulnerable about certain things. So it seemed like, oh, we have a lot in common. He understands. And he just seemed different because me also growing up, the type of men that I would date was kind of like, you know, the kind of rough, like edgy type guy, you know. And so this was just very different. It was just very different.
Yeah. The edgy guys, that's my problem now. But I think it's important to note that I do think that it just in my friendships now, people are like, you just got to date the guy that's different, not the type that you usually go for.
Yeah.
And so that does initially attract me when I'm in the dating relationships. It's like, wow, this guy is really different. So I can definitely empathize with you in that way. When your ex-husband told you that he wanted to keep it secret, how did that feel for you? And did anything go off at that moment?
You know what? Because this is like, 10 years now? Over 10 years. When I look back at that, I'm like, how? How did I fall for that, right? But the way he painted it was, you know, you're the love of my life. You're who I prayed for. You're perfect. You're everything I desire. Except, you know, we have to kind of work around this situation with his current church because he was the pastor. And I think somehow and again, I was young in my faith at the time, he spiritualized it and made it make sense to me. And I didn't investigate. I don't think I asked the right questions. So honestly, I think I accepted it. I was okay with it. And when I look back at that now, I'm like, wow, like because of who I am today, I'm like, how did I fall for that? But I think he was just very good with his words. And also my then pastor knew everything that was happening. So it felt like I felt safe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when there's another person involved that you even respect, there's like a level of accountability that you feel. So I can definitely see how that was. Can you share a little bit about what did the first year or two look like in your relationship? Like, how did it feel to be married at that point?
So the first year, honestly, it was okay. Right now, it wasn't private. Only a few people knew, my then pastor, his sister, and a handful of my friends. My mother, family didn't know back home. And so we lived together, but life was not very public. And it was okay at that time because I was still going to my old church. He was pastoring at his church. I think things didn't really change until I got pregnant with my daughter. And that's when I started to see the change. And that's when I think the verbal abuse I started to recognize that. But again, a lot of that was normal to me because I grew up in an environment where people were harsh with their words. And so the first year seemed pretty comfortable. I was kind of in that love bomb kind of fairy tale kind of phase. But when I got pregnant and my body started to change, I feel like he started to lose attraction for me. And that's when the abuse, when I look from hindsight, became more noticeable.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so you all were essentially living together, but living separate lives for the first year.
Yeah.
And when did you become pregnant? Was that the second year within your marriage?
It was the second year. Yep.
And it was simultaneously as it was becoming public as well?
Yeah. So I got pregnant. My daughter was born September 2015. So I got pregnant like the end of 2014. And we got married so like a year and a half. Yeah. So it was like a year and a half from getting married until I got pregnant. I don't remember the question.
No, I just wanted a clarifying question. Was it the second year when you became pregnant, and then you're simultaneously
like a year and a half later,
and then you're also simultaneously assuming the role? Did you then transition to his church and assuming the first lady position?
Yes. So it was actually a little bit before my daughter was born.
Okay.
So it was about a year later. So we got married August 2013, and I think it was around May or June 2014 when we became public. So it's just like one day I popped up at the church and he made an announcement. And from that day forward, I was the first lady. I was a 27-ish old first lady. Yeah.
Yeah. And for those that are unfamiliar in the Christian church,
yeah,
a pastor's wife is known as the first lady.
Yeah.
And depending on what church you go to, there's expectations for that. There's responsibilities, there's roles that you have to play within that. That's very subjective to the church that you go to. So we won't go into all of that. But I just want to know, like, what did that feel for you in that assuming a first lady's position? You're starting to kind of notice the verbal abuse. Like, can you just share about, like, what did that season feel like for you?
Yeah. So I knew early on before I met him that I was called, right? I knew I had a heart for ministry. I knew I had a heart for people. And so a part of me felt like, this could be God's will, you know? And again, even though there was some emotional and verbal abuse happening, I normalized it. So it wasn't like raving red flags going off for me. And so I thought I was doing the Lord's will, and I was just moving forward in that, you know, and I was showing up the best I can, wanting to be supportive to the people, supportive to my husband, and just trying to get aligned with the plans and purpose that God had for me. Not realizing all that was going to unfold in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to land the plane. Like, we're going to go back in a second, but I do want to pull an excerpt from your book. And I do want you to give the context before I give the excerpt. So we're going to go to your, when your ex-husband told you that he wanted a divorce, and then you had to go to church essentially the next day and stand in front of everybody. Can you explain a little bit about, so you were in this position, you're going through the motions. Can you talk about how long you all were married, and then when did he decide that he wanted to get a divorce? Yeah.
So for me, it was very sudden. It was very sudden. So it was about 4 years into the marriage. From a public eyesight or mind, it would probably be like three years. And it was him it almost seemed like a switch just went off, where he wanted to initially kind of just separate. He was like, he wanted to separate. And I was like, okay, what, you know? And he was, because of his thinking and how his makeup and how he is as a person, it was like he needed me to make him happy, and he wasn't happy, and he's like, I'm not happy, and I'm like, well, what's the issue? So I was always kind of in the trying to figure out what's going on, and yeah, he suddenly was just like, he wants out, and I didn't understand it, you know. It wasn't until after things got more overt, because it was very covert and subtle throughout the marriage. When it got more overt is when I made and recognized that this is not the relationship that God has me for or has for me. And I got, wisdom and counsel from others that, maybe it's time to consider departing from this relationship. But yeah, it was literally like a switch went off where he said he didn't want to be together, and he wanted to step down as pastor, and he wanted to start a new life.
Got it.
Yeah.
So it was like a culmination of a lot of things. Like, he wanted to completely leave the life that he currently had. In your book, you say this was the day after you're at church, you go into a private room, and you said in your book, I was ashamed not just of the situation, but of the false version of my life I had so carefully maintained for years. I had smiled through church events and carried out my duties as if everything was fine, even though I was hurting. You then go on to say, my prayers and expectations were always that he would change and that things would improve for us, our marriage, and our family.
Yeah.
But divorce, wow, Lord. So you said there was some times where you've noticed, okay, this is a little overt, or like things are switching, these are changing. But you also said that there was kind of this expectation that you had. Can you share what that tension looked like?
Yeah. So he was very traditional in his thinking as far as husband and wife roles. And like I said, it was always me trying to keep him happy. And in that process, I was dying. I was literally like, I've never had an anxiety attack before until that relationship, because I literally couldn't keep up with the demand that he had on me as a wife. And so even though I was dying on the inside, I wasn't happy. I was trying to, I was working 12-hour days. He wanted me to pay the bills and also take care of everything domestically in the home. And I was just like, I can't keep up with this. And I was praying. I was asking God for change. Like, something needs to give, something needs to change. But I did not know it was going to be the marriage. So I was thinking that, somehow God was going to change him. But that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to get into like your healing and you finding out that it was actually abuse. But you said earlier, like, I was trying to fix it because, he would say he wasn't happy and things like that. Can you share a little bit about what does like fixing it look like, or what were some of the prayers or the things that you asked God for, like in those moments where you were trying to restore the relationship?
Yeah. So like I said, I knew I was called to ministry. He did not want a wife in ministry. So that was the first thing. I was like, well, God, you're showing me this. You're showing me my purpose. You're starting to show and reveal my identity and things that you're calling me to. However, I'm with someone who does not agree with this belief. Like, his belief system didn't allow for that. It didn't really allow for women in ministry. And so because of his traditional upbringing. And so I was just like confused. And so that was kind of like, I think the real root of my prayer initially, because I was having these dreams. God was revealing. I actually had the dream about this book while I was married to him. So I was like, before I understood the full meaning of it. And so that was the root of the prayers initially. Like, hey, God, speak to my husband. You're showing me these things. Can you reveal it to him? And then things started to, obviously get a little bit more toxic, especially after I had my daughter, and just kind of the control there and the belittlement there. And the demeaning there. And so I was just praying about specific situations as they would come up, that you speak to his heart. And then it would be highs and lows. If anyone has been in toxic relationships, you kind of recognize that there's cycles, so there's highs and lows. And so you kind of think, it's getting better. And then you have another incident or trigger, and then you're being devalued and belittled again. And so there was repeated cycles of that throughout the relationship. But I was just always trying to pray and stay hopeful. And I don't honestly think I would have ever, if he didn't make the decision to leave, I don't think I would have, because it didn't at that time align with my understanding of marriage. Now I don't agree you should just quickly leave for a marriage, but I didn't have the understanding of like God's understanding and how he sees abuse. And so, I kind of went on a lot there, but
No, I think that's important, especially because my next question was going to be like, if he hadn't said like, we need to get a divorce, is that something that you would have endured with him? And also in your book, like you mentioned that you and him, and then there was like a relationship expert, someone that you all both were familiar with. They text you after, your ex-husband essentially says everything under
Yes.
like whether it was your looks, whether it was how much money you made, etc. And then walking away from that, the next day you get a text message that says like, wow, like you're gonna have to do a lot of like emotional work because that was abuse. And that is when it clicked for you.
Yeah, that's when it started to click. Yeah. Yes. So I don't think it might have took many more years, but where I was then, before everything blew up, I don't think I would have walked away because I was really desiring that idea of marriage that I had, right?
Yeah.
Wanting to get married, have children by the same person, and not repeat what I experienced growing up, you know? And so I think I would have fought because I didn't understand what it was until I got out, right? And so I think I would have stuck around much longer, unfortunately, if he didn't walk away. But I am grateful that he did. I honestly, I'm grateful because that would have, you know, I was deteriorating in that relationship. And so if I stayed, I don't know who I would have become, right? And so, yeah, it really took other people to start naming and calling things out. And especially like some years later when I started therapy, like for me to really understand what was happening and almost in a sense have a certain appreciation for what happened because it led me on such a beautiful journey of healing. But yeah, I don't think I would have left right away. And it wasn't until other people actually started with my friend who sent me a text message with a link on narcissism. Like it was like 15 signs of a narcissist or something like that. And
within the marriage, this is like when you're still
the very end. Yeah. And she sent that to me and I read it and I was like, oh yeah, he checked every box but one at that time. And the one was, you know, something along the lines of like cheating and other people. I just didn't know at that time that was happening. But yeah, it was her. And then that relationship expert in Chicago, we went to her. She was recommended by my then pastor. And she literally told me like that was the worst session she's ever sat in. And I would need some heavy reconstruction and healing. Yeah.
We're going to get to the healing and then being on your own and like kind of how you were able to like cultivate your healing. But there's been times, and even in my past relationship, things were very tumultuous and I was praying to God and things were progressively getting worse. And I'll be very transparent. I was very angry at God because that I wanted, and I still want marriage. And that's something that I really desired. And I just didn't understand like why is this happening? Can you share a little bit about what were your emotions? Did it affect your relationship with God?
Absolutely.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually forgave my ex-husband and myself before I actually realized I was still angry with God. And so that was probably the last thing, sadly, in my healing journey that like, I was like, I am still upset with God because I thought I did everything right? Like I was the good Christian girl, you know, like I, you know, waited to have sex with him before marriage, you know, like I'm like, I did all these things right in my mind.
Yeah.
And I was like very upset with God. I was very upset. I'm like, why did you allow this to happen? But when I look back at it, and I really pulled back the layers on things and I got alone with myself and self-reflected and processed different things. I realized, no, this was never his plan, right? There was things that I ignored and I allowed. I think there was clear opportunities to leave in the beginning and I didn't take them. For example, we went to premarital counseling through my old church. And at the end of that session, they pulled us aside. The husband, it was a husband and wife couple. They pulled us aside and the wife told, like the husband went with him and the wife was with me. And she told me not to marry him. She didn't think he was ready. And I ignored that. You know, God gave me the way of escape and I didn't take it. And I just had to realize like, there was things that I was still, like I said, didn't process growing up, and I was holding on to, and it had nothing to do with him. Like, our healing is our responsibility, and Christ did everything for us. However, I wasn't receiving it. I wasn't accepting it. And that's not his fault. That's that hard truth. It was on me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I was upset with God, but not anymore.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about like the post ex-husband era right now. But can you also just share, like, just to clarify, a lot of the abuse was emotional and verbal only?
Yeah, it was mostly emotional. There was some financial, but financial, emotional, verbal abuse. Very narcissistic, covert narcissism, for sure. Yeah.
And can you describe, for those that are unfamiliar, what is the definition of covert narcissism?
So covert narcissists, they're a little bit more vulnerable, and they're kind of probably, in my opinion, the worst because they're a little bit more under the radar. Overt narcissists or malignant narcissists, they're, kind of what you would think of, somebody who's walks around very, cocky, very selfish, but that wasn't him because, he upheld his role as a pastor from the public image, and what that looked like. But behind closed doors, it was very, very subtle. Not, no physical abuse or anything like that. There was just maybe one instance that I would categorize as physical, but outside of that, it was mostly just emotional and verbal. Mm-hmm.
So what did that look like once, you got the text message that it really rang the alarms that, wow, this is abuse, the divorce process? Like, can you share a little bit of, like, did he end the church? Did you step down first? Can you share a little bit about what that transition looked like from being married to him to being on your own?
So he chose to step down first. So he was the third generation pastor of his church. And so he, I think, talked to his mother first, who was the previous first lady, and, made the decision. And so the family kind of knew what was happening at a certain point, and that we were moving forward with a divorce. And so he publicly stepped down first, and then we continued through the divorce process, which happened very quickly because I was just in agreement. I wanted out. Some things transpired after seeing that relationship expert that just made me realize this man is really not safe.
Yeah. And you even mentioned in your book that he did feel safe because he was a Christian and things of that nature. So it was almost like once you got that green light of like, wait, this actually isn't what I think it is. And did you feel a level like through that process that you needed to protect him, that you need to protect his image, that you need to protect your image? Like, can you talk a little bit about what were you kind of, what am I trying to say? Like, what were you telling yourself in that season?
Like in the season when I was going through divorce?
Yeah, when you were going through the divorce.
No, not at that point. At that point, I was ready to go. And I was no longer trying to protect. There was an incident. It was a little bit after Thanksgiving, or was it before? A little bit before Thanksgiving, actually. And he lied and had me arrested. And I sat in jail for a night for something I did not do. And that's when I knew I needed out. I wanted out. And at that point, it's like I got thicker skin. And I realized, and even while sitting in the jail cell that night, I asked for the Bible, and I just opened it up and was reading scripture. And like God was speaking to me even then. And I knew like, it's time to go. Yeah. It's time to go. And I had no hesitation about it at that point. And so I did. I publicly put it out there on Facebook. I was like, I'm going through a divorce. There was shame, of course, because we were public at that point. We were public, locally, like public figures, pastor, first lady. But I had to do what was best for me at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. And let's talk about like the process of you kind of essentially picking yourself back up. What did that in between look like?
Yeah. So at first it wasn't smooth. It was a slow process at first. I started to do some studying, right? And I started to put more language to what I was experiencing on my own. Like YouTube University, just like looking up videos, like, because I got this word, narcissist. I'm like, okay, what is this? And it started to kind of explain some things for me. But it was a lot of just like knowledge and head knowledge. I wasn't really doing any like soul work, the inner work, and not really. I was super focused on him and what he did and what he is and his problems and this happened and that happened, but I wasn't really focusing on myself. So I didn't get to me probably until 2 years later. So like I said, I tried to date too soon, I think, in my opinion, after my divorce, initially with someone that I knew previously, from like I was friends with previous to my marriage, and then someone else. And I started at this point, because I was doing like that research on my own, I was a little bit more aware of the flags, and I started to see stuff, and I started to have like a little bit more standards for myself. And I was just like, okay, no. And then I had someone who wouldn't take that no and was kind of like harassing and stalking me. And I was like, you know what? Let's pause here, because I am seeing this cycle of toxic people and toxic relationships show up a little bit too much. And so about 2 years after my divorce is when I got serious about therapy. I attempted it before, but I wasn't consistent. And it took a while, but I found a therapist that worked for me. And I was comfortable talking about everything, biblically, my faith, my childhood. We just went through the whole gamut. And I literally went with her, worked with her for every week for about 3 or 4 years. And that's what it kind of initiated, like the deep work. And then also, because I did get upset with God, I was still going to church. I was still showing up for church, but there was that like hardness of heart there. I finally started to also kind of like my heart started to get more tender and really started to surrender and seek God again, and go through like inner healing, and deliverance and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So I know you said you forgave your ex-husband. Is that something that he's aware of, or did you make that internal peace?
I was not a conversation that we had, because I still we co-parent, but I still choose to keep boundaries. But we don't have any issues, and, if he is honest on how I interact with him, I don't interact with him like I'm bitter or upset or anything like that. I'm not holding anything against him, because I understand, I know his childhood and I know things that he's been through. So I actually have a lot of compassion. It's unfortunate that, his life he chooses to live, the way he does. But yeah.
So you forgave your husband, you forgave yourself, and then you realized that it was God that you kind of had beef with.
I had some beef with God still. Yeah.
Can you share the breakthrough? Because I mean, you were in therapy, you were starting to surrender your life to God, but what was that turning point that you can recall that really shifted things?
Honestly, it was a moment encounter with him, right? So I was in my bedroom. I was listening to just like some worship on my TV at the time. And like literally I felt the tangible presence of God like come into my room, and the weight of his presence was like holding me down on the ground. And I was just crying, right? Crying out to him. And it was like, he just spoke to my heart, and I understood like, oh my God, I'm still angry with you, God. And in that moment I repented, and I said, everything clicked. And I just felt like I was a little girl in like a daddy's arms again. And like from that day, like so much shifted within me, because it felt like even though I moved on, I was, out of that relationship. I think even at the time I was dating my current husband, and there was still something. I was like, something is like blocking me from fully moving forward, not relationally, just in life. Like there was something hindering me, and it was that. Like I needed to be fully realigned with my Father, my Heavenly Father, on a heart level. Yeah.
And because we're going to go into your current husband in a minute.
Yeah.
But you shared earlier that like this was when you first came to faith and you had this perception of marriage. You had this perception of what love means according to scripture. And you said like, or so I thought. What did your now view or your view before you got married for again, how did that perspective of marriage and love change?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with self-love. So as I shared, I kind of threw in there a little bit earlier, like there was some codependency, if I'm just honest, there was some codependency, and the root of that is really a lack of self-love. And I had time, and I also shared, I was that girl that was always in a relationship, or I always had a friend. I always had somebody, right? And I had time after my ex-husband, after some of the little toxic stuff that I had after that, to just be with me, and God. And I started to just value who He created me to be. And I got really rooted in my identity.
And what did that look like?
Like the process, or it looked like doing things that I always wanted to do that I was too afraid to do because of what other people thought or would say. Like, for example, cutting my hair. I was that girl that I always had long hair, like as a young girl, Pocahontas. And I always had this desire, just like I used to love TLC when I was a kid, right? And I always wanted to cut my hair like T-Boz. And like, it was just liberating to cut my hair and do something that I wanted to do. Even when I was married to my ex-husband, he wouldn't let me cut my hair. So it was like throughout my whole life, like I was controlled on things like cutting my hair. And I was like, I'm going to cut my hair. I'm growing it back out now. But, and that was, to me, it was like a form of self-love. And, I enjoyed dance. I started to just dance again. And I started to journal and just spend more time with myself and not outsource my joy. I was outsourcing my joy. I was allowing people and situations and how my life looked to determine my happiness. And it was really finding that within myself and in my relationship with God. Yeah.
And so you get to this point and you're simultaneously dating your now husband. How did you all meet, and what was different about him that you've never experienced before?
Yeah. So we met during the pandemic, and, we were, COVID lockdown. So it was a dating app.
It sure was.
A dating app. It was on Hinge. And honestly, I just got back on the scene that year, and I was like, you know what? Let me try this. A friend of mine, she was like, try Hinge. Hinge is like a little bit more than just like swipe left, swipe right. And so you have like a little profile. And I was on there for like a couple months at that time, but I was honestly over it. I was like, I went on a few dates, and that's how I knew I got stronger in my self-love, and I was seeing the red flags. So I went on a few dates, and I was like, nope. And I was good. And then one Friday when my daughter was with her father, because, we co-parent, I was just kind of alone, and I was just playing on there. And I was just joking off. I looked at his profile, and he had like 4 pictures, almost exactly the same, just a different fitted hat. And I'm like, this profile is bare minimum. And I started joking on him. And that's really what kicked off the conversation. And it was so different because he's literally the opposite. Like, he's very patient. Like, my previous marriage, it was rushed. Everything was moving quickly. Like, I almost thought he was catfishing me because he didn't asked for my phone number right away. Like we really got to know each other on the app. Like we were writing whole books back and forth for days, for like weeks. And I was like, why isn't this guy asking for my number? I'm like, he must be catfishing me. And then I dropped that. One of my friends was like, girl, just say something. And so I did. And then he literally, because on Hinge you can call people. That's the first time he like called me through the app, and we saw each other. And from there we exchanged phone numbers. But I want to say it's really was this when I look back at it, it was the safety, the respect of boundaries, him accepting my story, and then my daughter as well, and just the comfort. The greatest word for it is safety. I felt safe with him, and I wasn't rushed. And also, one of the things that I made sure I did this time that I didn't do the first time was get my community involved, because we did everything in private the first time. I didn't really allow my community, my family didn't get to know him. I made sure like, hey, like the closest people to me, what do you think about this person? Everybody loved him. Everybody was like, no, this is something there. And then on top of that, just because, just weird stuff, we met on a dating app, but one of my good friends is married to his cousin, which was just like, okay, how does that even happen? And so a lot of the pieces sort of, just came together. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was actually in a wedding last year, and they also met on Hinge. I'm like, why am I Hinge doing that?
And I have another friend who, like, I feel like they're very close to being engaged, met someone on Hinge. Yeah.
I mean, this is not sponsored, but I do think that it's something to say of like, you were literally just like, let's see what could happen, and then you just stumbled upon this man. And so when did you all, like, when did he propose? Like, how long did you all date before you realized, okay, this is someone I could spend the rest of my life with?
So he proposed 8 months in. We got married a year later. Yeah. And so I think it was early on. I think we kind of both knew. But I was still, I had the story. And I said, you know what? I want to take my time. Yeah. I'm not getting married in 3 months again. Not that he was trying to do that, but I wanted to make sure, I heard someone say you should go through every season with someone, And so I was like, yeah, let's give it a year. And he proposed. He came home with me, with my family to visit my family in New York. And he proposed to me in front of my family at a restaurant. So yeah.
And did you feel nervous, or did you feel like I don't want to repeat something that I did in the past? Like, can you just share a little bit about that, or were you just completely at peace? That wasn't even something you thought about?
No, I was definitely nervous. And there was, of course, like you're in a relationship with someone, there's going to be differences, there's going to be challenges. But one of the biggest differences that I saw with him was when I brought something to him that, was a concern or a problem or maybe offended me or made me scared, whatever. He was able to take accountability. He was able to recognize, and he was also willing to get help on different things. And so, he started going to therapy while we were dating as well, because like some things started to get highlighted for him. And so that made me feel really comfortable. And even my therapist, he ended up going to my therapist. She was like, girl, like, And so again, the whole community and just the differences, the positive things made me feel comfortable. But yeah, no, it wasn't like, oh, this is a cakewalk. No, I definitely had my fears. But again, I made sure I got pastoral counsel with someone who sat down with both of us. And we also did the premarital thing. And again, it was different all around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're almost at the tail end of our conversation, but I do kind of want to leave with some like reflective thoughts. You mentioned that, in the book, like, oh, why God? Like, I thought this was it. You even thought that, like, okay, you felt like you had, and you do have a calling to help women, to help people. And you thought that your original marriage aligned with that.
Yeah.
And so I just love to know, like, can you just speak to how things just end up happening the way they're supposed to, or talk about maybe the sovereignty of God? And sovereignty means kind of like him looking over the bigger picture of your life for those who are unfamiliar in simplest terms.
Yeah. You know, God's timing and our timeline are totally different, right? And so, yeah, I definitely had a certain timeline and a certain idea of how things should look. And again, God's timing and his plans are just perfect, right? And I think on honesty, again, if I go back, I did things in the way I was wanting them to go initially, and not really listening to the voice of God, or taking heed, because he was speaking. I just wasn't taking heed. And so I think he's a faithful God. He's faithful. And even when we make those wrong decisions, right? And sometimes we do, he knows how to kind of, like a GPS, get us back on track and kind of redirect us. And I think he's just, it's beautiful, because when I was with my ex-husband, he dropped the second bride, right? And I had no idea what I was going to go through, but he knew all along. And I'm like, God, you gave me this book while I was still with him, but you knew what I was going to go through, and you allowed it because you knew that I was going to get to the other side. And it's just, if we stay in alignment with him, he truly knows how to perfect our story, right? And, you know, work everything together. People say that all the time, work everything together for good. And I'm, like I said, in a sense, I'm almost grateful, because I now have this testimony, and I now have these lessons, and I now have this story that I realize can impact and has impacted so many women. And I can be hope for them. And I'm grateful for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've even been blessed by your book as well. And we've been talking about her book. I actually have it here, The Second Bride, and it's a biblical guide to rediscovering God's love, embracing self-love, and finding love again after abuse and divorce. And I am just so grateful that you wrote this book. And I love how you spoke to, even though maybe I fell short, or maybe I was doing things my way, I'm also a Christian. So God's way of kind of recentering us and bringing us back, and ultimately still propelling us to what we ultimately are here for, I think is a beautiful thing. If you can just think back to your 26-year-old self, what is something that you wish you would have known prior to about abuse, or maybe identifying the red flags, et cetera, that you know now?
Yeah. I don't know, what really just came to mind. It's just, I wish I would have been more patient, and took my time. And that's one of the big difference between my ex scenario and my current husband. Like, I was more patient, with myself and with the journey. And there's no rush. I think, the idea of it, when it hit like love and marriage, it felt like, oh, it needs to happen now. I need, like, oh, I'm close to 30. Like, oh, like for some reason, like 30 just felt like this big year where I'm like about to, I was gonna say like like die in a couple years.
It seems like a death sentence.
Yeah, I'm like, man, like it seems like, I'm like, if this didn't happen by 30, and so I think I just would have been more patient, be more patient with myself, and be patient with the journey, and just trust God's timing. I think I would have took my healing more serious sooner. And I think character is so more important than like all the external things I was desiring, family, love, career, all those things. I wish, like, I really prioritize the inner work and character over all of that, because I feel like I could have avoided a lot of things and made better decisions. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And obviously, like, sometimes we don't know until we know.
Mm-hmm.
But and everyone has a different situation, everyone's dating different people. But if you can just think of like a few things that now looking back, you wish you would have identified, whether it's a character trait or whether you mentioned like rushing, like that was like a red flag for you.
That's
But
a huge run for me now.
for any any woman or man that are like looking at this episode and they're like wondering, what are some of the things I could potentially be looking for? What are some things that come up for you?
I would say knowing your boundaries is a big one, and not being afraid to say no, because when you say no, that's when you see those flags show up for somebody that's toxic. Somebody who is like toxic and controlling and want their way, they don't like boundaries. And so I was like a yes person back then. And so having those healthy standards and having those boundaries and using them and enforcing them is a big one for sure. Yeah. Outside of the rushing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, including myself, will feel good about like, yeah, you actually can say no. You actually can assert your opinion, because that's when you realize like who the person that's sitting in front of you really is. They actually
respect you. If they like honor your no, like that shows like, okay, this is a good person. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. My last question is because this is something that a lot of women say, like when they're looking at a couple who's very successful, or they see something, they're like, what was your prayer, girl? And I know that in your book, you mentioned like you had specificity in your prayers. I'm just interested to know if you could share, like, what were some of the things that you were praying for as you were seeking love in a new way?
Yeah. I mean, I was praying for God's will. Like I used to be very like, or I've heard different opinions on this, like being very specific, like this color, this height, this, this or that. But I think once you get clear on your identity, on your call, on your purpose, where God is taking you, your prayer is to find someone that aligns with that. That is the biggest thing. Someone that is going to support and walk with you through thick and thin, who understands your calling, and that you guys can come together as a force and fulfill that in the earth. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've talked about so much. And I just want to thank you for trusting us with your story. Is there anything else that we haven't highlighted in this conversation that you think is very crucial for people to know?
Yeah. I feel like we talked about a lot. I just want to encourage everyone, to prioritize their healing, understanding who they are, cultivating a relationship and getting in alignment with God. Like those things are so important, especially while you're young, before you make those huge, major life decisions. Those things are definitely key. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I actually do have one more question. This is I promise. I love carrying on a conversation. We don't have to go too into your daughter, but I just love to know, like, you said that you didn't want to repeat the same mistake in your first marriage. Some things did come up, but how does it feel now that your daughter is able to see such a healthy relationship?
Oh my God. That's one of the greatest joys for me. That she's able to witness that, because her father is now has 3 divorces, and she's been through 2 of them. And so I'm just happy that, my current husband can be that constant, and our relationship can be that example that I never had. And she's old enough now, she's 10, and she expresses these things, and it just brings me joy. And my prayer is like, I'm always praying this, like, I don't want her to repeat that cycle. And I honestly believe that she won't, because she does have that opportunity to see what healthy love looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've also done the work and also to deconstruct some of that as well. Well, thank you so much, Aleida, for being on here. I really appreciate it. I think that this is such a prominent conversation. Is something that a lot of 20-somethings go through it. So I'm glad that they'll be able to hear a real example of what it looks like to go through it, but also to be redeemed by it as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And as always, we are uncovering who we are one step at a time, and we're unfolding at our own pace, and we're exactly where we need to be. Take care, everyone.